Today was one of those days that leave you thinking, why do so many people reject you? Why, when you need support the most, does everyone seem to disappear? If you've ever felt like the world is turning its back on you just when you need it the most, this message is for you. But be careful, because what you're about to read is not what everyone wants to hear, and not everyone will have the courage to face it. If you decide to ignore it, then you will be closing the door to a truth that could change your life forever. This message comes directly from above. God has something powerful to tell you today, something that most will overlook, but you are not here by chance. If you keep reading, you will discover why so many people reject you, and more importantly, why you shouldn't worry about it. Make no mistake, what comes next is not for the faint of heart. It's a strong message, one that will open your eyes and make you see life in a completely different way. If you've ever wanted to understand the real reason behind that rejection, why it seems like no one supports you, keep reading. What God has for you today is not an ordinary message. It's a revelation that few are willing to accept, but one you need to hear. Get ready, because this message could be the key to transforming everything you are experiencing. Do you dare to discover it? Because after this, nothing will be the same. When life presents unexpected challenges, it's natural to feel discouraged. However, it is precisely in those moments that trust in God's plan becomes crucial. He has a divine purpose for each of us, and although it may seem like doors are closing, others will open. The path may not be clear now, but every step we take is guided by His merciful hand. The rejection we face in life often makes us question our worth. However, it is important to remember that God never rejects those who trust in Him. He turns pain into strength and doubt into certainty. Every stumble is an opportunity to grow, to draw closer to the plan He has reserved for us. God does not promise a life without obstacles, but He guarantees that every challenge has a purpose. His promise of joy and blessings may seem distant during trials, but it is precisely in those moments that faith is strengthened. By fully trusting in His word, difficulties become stepping stones toward the prosperity He has promised us. In the midst of darkness, divine light always shines, showing the way. Often, what seems like a loss is actually preparation for something greater. The blessings that God has for us are not only material but also spiritual. He teaches us that true wealth lies in living according to His will, with the confidence that everything will turn out well in the end. There are moments when the decisions we make lead us down unexpected paths. In those instances, trusting in God becomes our greatest strength. Even when everything seems lost, He is working in our favor, preparing a victory that will exceed our expectations. It's easy to despair when things don't go as planned. However, God sees beyond what we can see. What seems like a failure may be the beginning of a greater blessing. Patience and faith are key to receiving what God has in store, because He never leaves His children unrewarded. Sometimes, the road is long and filled with trials that seem endless. But it is in perseverance where victory is found. God does not leave us alone in our moments of struggle. His presence is there, strengthening our faith and guiding us toward a future filled with blessings. Money, often seen as the solution to many problems, is not what truly brings peace to the heart. True financial security comes from trusting in God, who provides according to our needs and His divine plan. He promises to bless us beyond the material, giving us a prosperity that cannot be measured in earthly terms. Throughout life, we face moments of uncertainty that make us doubt our decisions. But when we place our trust in God, He guides us toward the right path. The security He offers us is unshakable because His plan is full of goodness and purpose for those who follow Him. Financial trials can be especially difficult, but God promises that we will never lack the essentials. He is our inexhaustible source of provision, and in times of scarcity, His generous hand sustains us. By trusting in His plan, we discover that money is just a resource, but true abundance comes from His grace. Every obstacle is an opportunity to strengthen our relationship with God. He calls us to trust in His plan, even when we do not understand the challenges we face. By embracing His will, we find peace and strength, knowing that everything that happens is part of a greater plan that will lead us to victory. When the world seems to be against us, it's easy to lose hope. However, God assures us that He is with us every step of the way. His unconditional love surrounds us, providing comfort and security in times of adversity. Trusting in Him allows us to see beyond the difficulties and find joy in His promise. God's blessings don't always arrive in the way we expect, but they always arrive at the perfect time. He knows our needs better than we do and knows when and how to provide. The key is to keep the faith, knowing that His timing is perfect and His plan is good. Life teaches us that not everything that glitters is gold, and that true value is not found in material wealth. God invites us to seek His kingdom first, and all other things will be added. When we put our priorities in order, we discover that divine prosperity goes beyond money and encompasses peace, love, and well-being. In moments of despair, remembering that God is in control brings calm. His plan is infallible, and although we cannot see the whole picture, we can trust that He is working for our good. His love for us is so great that He will never leave us without guidance, without comfort, or without hope. Many times, the test of our faith is trusting in God, even when everything seems to be against us. He calls us to stand firm, to believe that His promise of blessing will be fulfilled. Faith is our anchor in times of storm, and by trusting in Him, we find the strength to keep moving forward. Throughout the Bible, we see examples of how God turned difficult situations into blessings. In the same way, He continues to work in our lives today. Every challenge is an opportunity to see His hand in action, to experience His grace, and to witness His faithfulness. In life, it is common to face moments when it seems that everything is against us. But those are precisely the moments when God calls us to trust more in Him. His plan is always for our good, even when we do not understand it. By trusting in Him, we discover that His way is always the best. Faith in God does not eliminate challenges, but it gives us the strength to face them. He promises us a life filled with blessings, but He also warns us that there will be trials. By maintaining our faith, we find peace in the midst of the storm and hope in the midst of despair. God constantly reminds us that His plan is to prosper us and not to harm us. His purpose is to give us a future full of hope. By trusting in Him, we can face any challenge with the assurance that His hand is upon us, guiding us toward a life of abundance and blessing. In life, fear is a silent enemy that paralyzes our dreams and distances us from the purpose God has for us. But faith, in contrast, is the force that drives us to overcome any obstacle. Trusting in God allows us to face our doubts and fears, knowing that He is in control and that nothing is impossible for Him. Often, fear makes us question our decisions and leads us to inaction. However, God calls us to walk by faith, not by sight. He assures us that, although the path may be uncertain, His presence will accompany us. Every step we take in faith is a step toward the victory that God has promised. Faith is like a muscle, it strengthens with use. The more we trust in God, the stronger our faith becomes, and the less power fear has over us. It is in moments of adversity when our faith is tested, and by passing that test, we discover the true peace that only God can offer. Facing fear with faith is an act of courage. It's not about not feeling fear, but about not allowing that fear to control us. God gives us the courage we need to face our fears, reminding us that His perfect love casts out all fear. With faith in His power, we can move forward, confident that He is with us. It's easy to succumb to fear when circumstances seem overwhelming. However, God reminds us that faith is the shield that protects us from the enemy's arrows. By keeping our faith high, difficulties lose their power over us. Every act of faith is a declaration that we trust in God's perfect plan. Many times, the lack of money can generate fear and insecurity. But when we trust in God, we understand that He is our source of provision. We should not fear scarcity, because God promises that He will supply all our needs. By placing our faith in His promise, we discover that money is just a resource, but true security comes from His generous hand. Faith allows us to see beyond what our natural eyes perceive. Although fear tries to blind us with doubts, faith opens our spiritual eyes to see God's hand working in our favor. When we trust in His word, fear loses its dominion, and hope rises in our hearts. Moments of uncertainty are perfect tests for our faith. Instead of succumbing to fear, we must remember that God is faithful to His promises. He never abandons us, and although we may not see the solution immediately, we can be sure that He is working in our favor. Faith in His goodness gives us the tranquility we need to wait on Him. Fear makes us forget the times God has been faithful in the past. But faith brings to mind previous victories, reminding us that if God did it before, He will do it again. By remembering His faithfulness, we find the strength to overcome any fear, trusting that He will never leave us nor forsake us. Throughout history, we see how men and women of faith faced great challenges with courage. Their stories inspire us to follow in their footsteps, knowing that the same faith they had is available to us. By following their example, we learn that faith in God is the key to overcoming any fear that comes our way. Fear tries to make us believe that we are alone in our struggles, but God assures us that He is always with us. His constant presence is a reminder that we have nothing to fear. By trusting in His promise to be by our side, fear fades, and faith is strengthened, giving us the peace we need. Faith and fear cannot coexist in the same space. When we choose faith, we displace fear. God calls us to trust in Him at all times, no matter how great the trial. By holding on to His word, we find the strength to overcome fear and move toward the future with hope. Difficult moments are opportunities for our faith to grow. Although fear tries to dominate us, we must remember that God is greater than any challenge. By keeping our faith in Him, we discover that mountains move and obstacles disappear. Trusting in God gives us victory over fear. Money is often a source of worry and fear, but God calls us to trust in His provision. He owns everything and promises to bless us when we place our faith in Him. By trusting in His plan, we find that the fear of scarcity disappears, and the peace of knowing that we are in His hands fills our hearts. In life, there will always be reasons to fear, but there will also always be reasons to have faith. God reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles. He is with us, guiding and protecting us. By placing our trust in Him, fear loses its power, and faith leads us to victory. When we face fear, it is important to remember that God is in control. Nothing happens without His knowledge, and everything He allows is for our good. By trusting in His plan, we discover that there is no reason to fear because we are safe in His love and care. Faith in God gives us the right perspective to face challenges. While fear tells us to retreat, faith urges us to move forward. God calls us to trust in Him, to believe that His promise of blessing is true. By choosing faith over fear, we open the door to a future full of hope and prosperity. Sometimes, fear seems overwhelming, but God gives us the tools to overcome it. His word is our sword, and faith is our shield. With these spiritual weapons, we can face any fear that comes our way, knowing that victory is assured in Christ. Life is a journey full of ups and downs, but faith gives us the stability we need. Although fear tries to shake us, faith in God keeps us steady. He is our rock, our refuge in times of storm. By trusting in Him, we discover that there is no fear that can bring us down. God calls us to walk by faith, not by sight. Although fear tries to stop us, we must remember that His plan is good and perfect. By trusting in His direction, we find the courage to face any challenge. Faith gives us the strength to move forward, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. Difficult times are inevitable in life, but we are not meant to face them alone. God offers us His guidance and wisdom in every challenge, reminding us that His plan is perfect, even when we don't understand it. By seeking His direction, we find the right path, full of hope and purpose, even in the midst of darkness. It's easy to feel lost when problems seem overwhelming. However, God calls us to seek His counsel instead of relying on our own understanding. His word is a lamp for our feet and a light on our path. By following His guidance, we find peace in the midst of chaos and clarity in confusion. Often, we try to solve our problems on our own, forgetting that God is willing to help us. He invites us to give our worries to Him, promising to give us the wisdom we need. By trusting in His direction, we avoid the mistakes that come from relying solely on our own strength. In times of difficulty, the temptation to make impulsive decisions is strong. However, God teaches us to be patient and wait for His perfect timing. He knows the big picture and knows what is best for us. By seeking His guidance before acting, we avoid future regrets and walk in His will. Throughout life, we will face decisions that seem too big to handle. In those moments, it is vital to remember that we are not alone. God is with us, ready to guide us and show us the way. By asking for His direction, we receive the wisdom needed to make the right and just decisions. Money can be a great source of stress, especially in times of uncertainty. But God promises to guide us in our finances if we trust in Him. By applying biblical principles of stewardship, we find that divine wisdom leads us to prosperity and peace, even in the midst of scarcity. Life is full of decisions that can change our course forever. However, we do not have to make those decisions alone. God offers us His guidance through prayer and His word. By seeking His counsel, we can be sure that we are walking on the right path, one that leads to blessing and peace. In the midst of the storm, God's voice is an anchor that keeps us steady. His guidance gives us the strength to face challenges and the wisdom to make wise decisions. When everything around us seems uncertain, His word is a beacon of hope that directs us to a secure future. Sometimes, financial problems can lead us to make hasty decisions. However, God reminds us that His guidance is always the best. By trusting in His provision and following His direction, we find that our needs are met and that money, while important, is not the center of our security. In difficult times, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by emotions and worries. However, God invites us to rest in His peace and seek His guidance. By doing so, we find calm in the midst of the storm and clarity to see the path He has prepared for us. God's wisdom is not only found in the great moments of life, but also in daily decisions. By seeking His direction in every aspect of our lives, we discover that His guidance leads us on paths of peace and blessing. No matter how small the problem, His counsel is always relevant and useful. When we face difficult decisions, the pressure to make the right choice can be overwhelming. However, God assures us that His guidance is available to those who seek it. By trusting in His wisdom instead of our emotions or desires, we find the right path, one that is full of blessing and purpose. Trials and difficulties often reveal our need for divine guidance. God uses those moments to draw us closer to Him and teach us to trust in His plan. By seeking His direction, even in the darkest times, we discover that He has a purpose for every challenge and that His guidance will lead us to victory. The temptation to seek quick solutions in difficult times can be great, but God calls us to seek His counsel first. By doing so, we find that His way, although sometimes slower, is always the best. He guides us to decisions that not only solve our problems, but also lead us to greater blessing. Moments of financial uncertainty can make us doubt the future. However, God promises to guide us in every decision we make. By trusting in His direction, we avoid costly mistakes and find that His plan for our finances is much bigger and better than we could imagine. In times of confusion, The clarity that God offers is invaluable. His Word gives us the right perspective to see things as He sees them. By seeking His guidance, we learn to trust in His plan, even when we don't fully understand it. His direction always leads us to the right place at the right time. God not only guides us in difficult times but also in times of joy. By seeking His direction in all areas of our lives, we avoid falling into complacency and keep our focus on His will. True prosperity comes when we follow His guidance, not only in difficult times but also in good ones. In every season of life, God offers His guidance to those who seek it. Whether in times of abundance or scarcity, His counsel is always relevant. By trusting in His direction, we discover that no matter what we face, He always has a plan for our good and for His glory. Financial decisions can be especially difficult in times of crisis, but God reminds us that His wisdom is available to us. By applying biblical principles to our finances and seeking His guidance, we find peace and security, knowing that He is in control and that His provision never fails. God calls us to seek His guidance in every aspect of our lives. By doing so, we discover that His direction always leads us to a place of peace, blessing, and purpose. Even in the most difficult times, His hand is upon us, guiding us toward a future full of hope and prosperity. Life can be unpredictable and full of challenges, but God promises us His constant protection. No matter how great the storms we face, His hand is always upon us, guarding us from all harm. His presence is a shield that protects us in the midst of difficulties, assuring us that we are safe under His loving care. Throughout the Scriptures, we see how God has protected His people in times of danger. From David facing Goliath to Daniel in the lion's den, divine protection is a recurring theme. These stories are not just ancient tales but living reminders that the same protection is available to us today. By trusting in God, we find security, no matter the circumstances. Divine provision is another crucial aspect of our relationship with God. He promises to supply all our needs, and not just the material ones. God cares for us in all areas of life, from financial to spiritual. When we place our trust in His provision, we discover that He always provides, often in unexpected and miraculous ways. Money can be a constant concern for many, but God calls us to trust in His provision. He owns everything, and when we depend on Him, we find that we never lack what we need. His provision is perfect, arriving at just the right time and in the exact amount. By trusting in His plan, we experience the peace that comes only from knowing that our finances are in His hands. God's protection does not mean that we will never face difficulties, but it does mean that we will not be alone in the midst of them. He promises to be with us, guiding and protecting us from dangers we cannot see. His presence is our refuge, and in Him, we find the strength to face any challenge. In times of scarcity, it's easy to worry about how we will get by. However, God assures us that He is our provider. When we trust in His provision, we find that even in the most difficult moments, He finds a way to meet our needs. His generous hand is never shortened, and His love never fails. Divine protection covers more than just the physical. God also protects us emotionally and spiritually, guarding us from anxiety, fear, and despair. By placing our trust in His care, we find peace in the midst of chaos and hope in the midst of uncertainty. His protection is complete, covering every aspect of our lives. Sometimes, God's provision arrives in ways we don't expect. It may be through an opportunity that arises out of nowhere, the help of a friend at just the right moment, or even a change in our circumstances. By keeping our eyes open to His work, we see how His provision is always around us, ready to manifest when we need it most. When we face financial challenges, it's natural to feel fear. However, God calls us to remember that He is our provider. By trusting in His promise, we find that our needs are met, even when circumstances seem impossible. His provision is sure, and His love guarantees that we will never lack what is necessary. Divine protection is not only for us but also for our loved ones. God promises to care for our families, protecting them from all harm. By praying for His protection, we can rest assured that He is watching over those we love. His care is constant, and His love is unbreakable. God's provision does not always arrive in the way we expect, but it always arrives at the perfect time. Sometimes, what we think is a delay is actually preparation for something better. By trusting in His timing, we discover that His provision is perfect, meeting all our needs in abundance. In times of danger, God's protection is our safety. He is our strong tower, our refuge in times of need. No matter how great the threat, His protection is greater. By trusting in His power, we find the peace that comes from knowing that we are safe in His hands. Divine provision is not just about money but also about wisdom, peace, and strength. God supplies everything we need to face each day, giving us the tools necessary to prosper. By trusting in His provision, we find that He always gives us exactly what we need, when we need it. Life is full of dangers, but God's protection surrounds us like a shield. He guards us from the enemy's attacks, ensuring that we are safe under His care. His protection is impenetrable, and nothing can touch us without His permission. By trusting in Him, we find the security that the world cannot offer. God's provision is constant and abundant. He never tires of blessing us, and His generosity knows no bounds. By trusting in His provision, we find that our needs are always met and that He is faithful to care for us at all times. His generous hand is always extended toward us. Throughout the Bible, we see examples of how God protected His people in the midst of great dangers. These accounts are not just stories but living proofs of His protective power. By remembering these examples, we find the faith to believe that the same protection is available to us today. God never changes, and His care is eternal. In times of need, it's easy to doubt God's provision. But He calls us to trust in His plan, knowing that He always provides. By resting in His promise, we find that our needs are met in ways that exceed our expectations. His provision is generous, and His love is constant. Divine protection does not mean that we will never face challenges, but it does mean that we will never be alone in them. God promises us His constant presence, guiding and protecting us at all times. By trusting in His protection, we find the peace that comes from knowing that He is with us every step of the way. God's provision is more than enough for all our needs. He blesses us abundantly, beyond what we could ask or imagine. By trusting in His provision, we find that we never lack what is necessary and that His generosity always manifests in our lives in surprising ways. God promises us His protection and provision, not just for today but forever. His love is eternal, and His care has no end. By trusting in Him, we find the security and abundance that only He can offer. His promise is faithful, and in Him we can rest, knowing that we are completely safe and provided for. In a world full of uncertainties, the promise of divine protection and provision offers us a refuge of peace. God, in His infinite wisdom, knows what we need even before we ask. His care is constant, and His love is unbreakable. By trusting in His provision, we find security in the midst of trials and adversities. Life presents challenges that often seem insurmountable. However, God assures us that we are never alone in our struggles. His protection is like a shield that surrounds us, safeguarding us from visible and invisible dangers. By placing our trust in Him, we discover that His power is sufficient to keep us safe in any circumstance. In times of need, it's natural to worry about the future. But God invites us to rest in His provision. He promises to supply all our needs according to His riches in glory. This promise is not limited to the material, but also encompasses our emotional and spiritual needs. By trusting in His provision, we experience His faithfulness in surprising ways. Money, often seen as a solution to our problems, is not the final answer. God teaches us that His provision goes beyond the financial. When we trust in Him, we discover that His plan for our lives is much greater than any sum of money. His provision includes peace, love, and a life full of purpose. Throughout history, we see how God has provided for His people in times of need. From manna in the wilderness to the multiplication of loaves and fishes, His provision has always been abundant. These stories are not just ancient accounts, but living reminders that the same God continues to provide for us today. Divine protection does not always mean that we will avoid difficulties, but it does mean that we will be preserved in the midst of them. God promises to be with us every step of the way, guiding and protecting us. His presence is a constant in our lives, giving us the assurance that no matter what happens, we are in His hands. Sometimes, God's provision arrives in unexpected ways. It may be through an opportunity that arises out of nowhere or the help of a friend at just the right moment. By keeping our hearts open to His provision, we see how His hand is always working in our favor, even when we don't immediately perceive it. When we face financial challenges, it's easy to fall into worry. However, God calls us to remember His promise of provision. He is our provider, and His provision is always sufficient. By trusting in His promise, we find that our needs are met, even in the most difficult moments. God's protection covers not only the physical but also the spiritual and emotional. He guards us from anxieties that could consume us and fears that could paralyze us. By trusting in His protection, we find peace in the midst of life's storms. His care is total, covering every aspect of our existence. God's provision does not always arrive in the form we expect, but it always arrives at the perfect time. Sometimes, what seems like a delay is actually preparation for something better. By trusting in His timing and plan, we discover that His provision is perfect, meeting all our needs in abundance. In times of danger, God's protection is our strength. He is our strong tower, our safe refuge in times of adversity. No matter how great the threat, His protection is greater. By trusting in His power, we find the peace that comes from knowing that we are safe in His hands. Divine provision is not limited to the material. God supplies our emotional needs, providing comfort in times of sorrow and strength in times of weakness. His love is a constant source of provision, giving us everything we need to face life's challenges with courage. Now that you have received this powerful message, the question is, what will you do with it? God has shown you a truth that few have the courage to face, and it is up to you to take action. You cannot allow this knowledge to remain mere information. It's time to apply it to your life. Have you wondered how your life would change if you decided to act in faith, without fear of rejection? This is the moment to take a step toward the transformation you so desire. It's not just about knowing, it's about doing. What will you do differently starting today? God has given you the key, but you are the one who must open the door. Will you continue to let fear and doubt dominate your decisions, or will you take that leap toward what God has prepared for you? The choice is yours, but make no mistake, this is a unique opportunity to rewrite your story. Before you go, I want to challenge you to reflect on what you've learned today. How can you apply this truth to your daily life? What small changes can you make right now that could lead you to a fuller, more blessed life? Don't miss this opportunity. And if this message resonated with you, if you feel that someone else needs to hear it, don't hesitate to share it. Finally, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. You won't want to miss the upcoming messages that will continue to guide you on this path of faith and transformation. God has much more for you, and each video is a piece of that great plan He has for your life. See you in the next message.